I was just 13 when my father chose his new wife over me. "Pack your things," he said coldly that rainy October night. "Patricia can't handle your attitude anymore. No discussion, no second chances." My stepmother watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a satisfied smile playing at her lips, as I stuffed clothes into my backpack. He drove me to my grandmother's house in silence, dropped me off like an unwanted package, and disappeared from my life for 15 years. Now his third marriage has imploded, his business is bankrupt, and his reputation is destroyed after a very public scandal. Suddenly he's calling daily, claiming he's changed and always loved me. Before I tell you how I responded to the man who abandoned his own child, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to decide whether someone who hurt you deserves a second chance. The story of my father's betrayal begins long before that rainy night when he dropped me at my grandmother's doorstep. My mother died from cancer when I was 8 years old. For 3 years after her death, it was just my father and me in our small suburban home, navigating grief together and forming what I thought was an unbreakable bond. My father, Robert Wilson, was an accountant with his own small practice. He worked long hours, but always made time for what he called our special Saturday adventures, hiking trips, museum visits, or simply getting ice cream and walking through the park, while I told him about my week at school. Those 3 years were difficult as we both mourned my mother, but there was never any doubt in my mind that my father loved me and would always protect me. Everything changed when he met Patricia Lawson at a client appreciation event. She was strikingly beautiful, with perfect blonde hair, expensive clothes, and a laugh that commanded attention in any room. From their first date, it was clear Patricia had very specific ideas about what her life should look like, and those ideas did not include raising another woman's child. "Your dad is such a catch," she told me during our first meeting, her smile never reaching her eyes. "We are going to have such a wonderful life together." The "we" in her statement did not include me, though I was too young to recognize that warning sign. Within 6 months, they were married, and Patricia moved into our home, immediately redecorating and removing most photographs of my mother. My father, seemingly enchanted by his new wife, allowed these changes without protest. "We need to look forward, not backward," he explained, when I asked why my mother's favorite reading chair had disappeared from the living room. "Patricia is helping us build a new life." The new life Patricia envisioned had increasingly little room for me. She complained about my presence at dinner parties, suggested I spend weekends at friends' houses, and criticized everything from my clothing to my hobbies. When I achieved good grades or received compliments from teachers, she would dismiss these accomplishments with backhanded comments like, "Well, at least you are good at something." My father, who had once been my strongest advocate, became a passive observer to Patricia's gradually escalating hostility. When I sought his intervention, he would offer weak responses. "She is just adjusting to being a parent," or "try to understand how difficult this is for her." The situation deteriorated rapidly when Patricia announced her pregnancy 11 months into their marriage. My existence shifted from inconvenience to threat in her mind, as if my very presence might somehow harm her unborn child or diminish the attention her baby would receive. "This house is too small for another child," I overheard her telling my father late one night. "We need to think about our family's future. Emma is part of our family," my father responded, one of the few times he attempted to defend me. "Is she?" "Because all I see is a sullen teenager who resents me, and will probably resent our baby too. Sometimes I think she is deliberately trying to cause problems between us." These accusations were entirely unfounded. Despite my private feelings about Patricia, I had made every effort to be polite and accommodating, helping with household chores, and maintaining good grades to avoid creating additional stress. But Patricia had decided I was the enemy, and my father, eager to preserve his new marriage and anticipating fatherhood again, gradually accepted her distorted narrative. The final confrontation came shortly after my 13th birthday. I had returned from school to find Patricia going through my backpack and reading my private journal. When I protested this invasion of privacy, she claimed she was looking for drugs because my recent behavior had been suspicious. This accusation was so detached from reality that I finally lost my carefully maintained composure. "You have been trying to get rid of me since the day you met Dad," I said, years of hurt and frustration pouring out. "You do not have to make up lies about me. Just admit you never wanted me here." Patricia burst into tears, a performance I had witnessed numerous times whenever she felt challenged. By the time my father arrived home from work, she had crafted a story about me verbally attacking her and making her fear for the safety of her unborn child. My attempts to explain what actually happened fell on deaf ears. That evening, my father informed me I would be going to live with my maternal grandmother until things settled down. The temporary arrangement was revealed as permanent when he dropped me off with 2 suitcases and a hollow promise to figure things out soon. My grandmother, Elena Reyes, lived on a fixed income in a one-bedroom apartment across town. Despite her own limited resources and the cramped quarters, she welcomed me without hesitation, immediately converting her small living room into a bedroom space for me. Unlike my father, she never treated me as a burden or an inconvenience. "Family does not abandon family," she told me that first night, her voice firm with conviction. "We will make this work together." Those words would become the foundation of my new life, a sharp contrast to the conditional love I had experienced in my father's home. As I watched his car drive away that rainy night, I had no idea that 15 years would pass before I heard his voice again. Adjusting to life with my grandmother was both challenging and healing. Her apartment was in a different school district, meaning I had to transfer in the middle of the school year, losing the few friendships that had sustained me through my father's remarriage. The financial constraints of her fixed income meant many of the comforts I had taken for granted were no longer available. Yet these material losses were offset by something far more valuable: my grandmother's unwavering support and authentic love. Unlike my father, who had always measured his affection against Patricia's approval, my grandmother's commitment was absolute and unconditional. "You are not responsible for adults making bad decisions," she told me repeatedly during those early days when I still cried myself to sleep. "Your father's choices reflect his weaknesses, not your worth." At first, I kept expecting my father to call or visit to recognize the magnitude of his betrayal and make amends. I checked my phone constantly for messages and spent hours staring out the window of my grandmother's apartment, imagining his car pulling up to take me home. When my half-brother was born 3 months after I moved out, I waited for an invitation to meet him, some acknowledgement that we were still connected by blood, if nothing else. None of these hopes materialized. The first year passed without a single visit, though he did send child support checks directly to my grandmother, the bare minimum required by law, without any supplemental funds for school activities or special needs. My grandmother never complained about the financial burden, but I was old enough to see her stretching her Social Security checks to cover my growing expenses. "Education is your ticket to independence," she would say, encouraging me to focus on school rather than our circumstances. "Learn everything you can so you will never have to depend on someone who can let you down." I took this advice to heart, channeling my hurt and anger into academic achievement. By sophomore year, I was at the top of my class, participating in numerous extracurricular activities and working part-time at a local library to contribute to our household expenses. My teachers took notice of both my abilities and my situation, connecting me with scholarship opportunities and college preparation programs. My father's absence became a painful background fact rather than a daily wound. I stopped checking my phone for messages from him and learned to answer questions about my family with simple, practiced responses that discouraged further inquiry. My grandmother became my primary family reference, the person I listed on school forms, and the one who attended parent-teacher conferences with quiet pride. During my junior year of high school, my grandmother's health began to decline. Arthritis made her daily tasks increasingly difficult, and her heart condition required additional medications our limited budget struggled to accommodate. Without discussing it with her, I increased my work hours and applied for additional school financial aid to help manage these new expenses. "You should be focusing on college applications, not working." "More shifts," she protested when she discovered what I had done. "We are family," I responded, echoing her words from years earlier. "We figure things out together. Remember." This reversal of caregiving roles accelerated during my senior year when my grandmother suffered a minor stroke. Her recovery was complicated by her existing health issues, requiring physical therapy and home modifications to accommodate her reduced mobility. The timing coincided with college decision season, forcing me to make choices based on proximity to my grandmother rather than program quality or scholarship offers. I eventually accepted admission to the state university 20 minutes from our apartment, arranging my class schedule around my grandmother's medical appointments and my work hours. Though not my first choice academically, the university offered a solid engineering program and enough financial aid to make attendance possible without crushing debt. Throughout these challenges, my father remained completely absent. No calls on my birthdays. No acknowledgement of my high school graduation where I delivered the valedictorian address. No inquiries about my grandmother's health, despite her being his former mother-in-law and the person raising his child. The child support check stopped on my 18th birthday, removing even that minimal connection to his legal obligations. College presented both new opportunities and continuing challenges. I excelled academically despite my complicated schedule, securing internships that paid well enough to ease our financial strain somewhat. My grandmother's health stabilized with proper management, though her mobility remained limited and her medical expenses substantial. During my junior year, an unexpected opportunity arose through one of my professors who had connections to a prestigious engineering firm in Seattle. The internship would lead to guaranteed employment after graduation, with a starting salary that would transform our financial situation. The only drawback was the 3-month separation from my grandmother during the initial training period. "You must accept," she insisted when I hesitated due to concerns about leaving her alone. "I did not raise you to pass up your dreams for my sake." After arranging for a neighbor to check on her daily and setting up medication delivery services, I reluctantly left for Seattle. The internship exceeded all expectations, and I returned with not only a job offer but connections that would eventually lead to my own consulting business. By 25, I had established myself professionally, purchased a small but comfortable house with an accessible in-law suite for my grandmother, and created the stable, secure environment that had been taken from me at 13. My success felt like both personal validation and a vindication of my grandmother's belief in me. Throughout these years of struggle and achievement, I had heard nothing from my father. His absence had become so complete that I rarely thought about him, except when medical forms asked for family health history I couldn't fully provide. I had no contact information for him, no knowledge of his life, beyond what my grandmother occasionally heard through distant mutual acquaintances. What I didn't know then was that his life had taken a dramatically different trajectory from mine, one that would eventually lead him back to the door of the daughter he had abandoned 15 years earlier. I learned about my father's downfall the way most people discover unexpected news in the digital age, through a social media notification. A former high school classmate who still lived in my hometown sent a message, "Isn't Robert Wilson your dad? The one all over the news right now." Attached was a link to a local news article with the headline, "Prominent accountant facing fraud charges after client audit reveals discrepancies." The accompanying photograph showed my father being escorted from his office by police, looking much older than my memories, but unmistakably him. According to the article, he was under investigation for embezzling funds from several clients over a period of years. The scheme had apparently begun after his accounting practice expanded significantly, following several high-profile client acquisitions. What started as borrowing from client accounts to maintain an increasingly lavish lifestyle eventually evolved into systematic fraud. The article mentioned that his third wife had filed for divorce immediately following his arrest, taking their 2 young children and moving out of state. This casual reference revealed information I hadn't known: that Patricia and my father had apparently divorced at some point, and he had remarried and had more children, half-siblings I had never met or even known existed. My immediate reaction was complicated, a mixture of shock, vindication, and an unexpected emptiness where I thought satisfaction might be. The man who had abandoned me was facing public humiliation and legal consequences for his choices, yet this brought none of the closure I might have expected. I shared the article with my grandmother, whose response reflected her characteristic wisdom. "Tragedy is never something to celebrate," she said softly, "even when it happens to those who have hurt us." In the weeks that followed, more details emerged through news reports and social media. My father's legal troubles extended beyond client fraud to tax evasion and falsifying business records. His third wife had apparently been unaware of his financial misconduct, but upon discovery had wasted no time in distancing herself completely from the situation. Most of his friends and professional associates made similar moves to separate themselves from the scandal. The criminal case proceeded quickly, resulting in a plea deal that included significant financial restitution, 5 years of probation, loss of his accounting license, and a suspended jail sentence contingent on meeting the terms of his probation. The civil lawsuits from former clients would likely continue for years, potentially claiming whatever assets remained after legal fees and restitution payments. I followed these developments with detached interest, almost as if reading about a stranger rather than the man who had once been the center of my childhood world. I made no attempt to contact him or involve myself in his situation, focusing instead on my own life and responsibilities. Then, 15 years and 7 months after he had dropped me at my grandmother's apartment, my father reached out. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday evening as I was preparing dinner for myself and my grandmother. The number was unfamiliar, and I almost let it go to voicemail before answering on the final ring. "Emma, is that you?" The voice was older, rougher, but instantly recognizable. "Yes." I kept my response neutral, unsure what to feel or say to this ghost from my past. "It is Dad," he said unnecessarily. "I have been trying to find you for weeks." The conversation that followed was brief and awkward. He explained that his life had hit some rough patches, and he had been doing a lot of thinking about what matters. He asked if we could meet in person to catch up and reconnect, as if our separation had been a mutual decision or natural drift, rather than his deliberate abandonment. I neither agreed to nor refused his request, stating only that I would need time to consider it. After ending the call, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing the surreal experience of hearing his voice after so many years of absence. My grandmother, who had overheard my side of the conversation, placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "Whatever you decide will be the right choice for you," she said. "You owe him nothing, but you owe yourself peace." The calls continued daily over the next 2 weeks, each one more desperate than the last. He left voicemails describing his regrets, his current struggles, and his desire to make amends. The subtext became increasingly clear: he was alone, financially devastated, socially isolated, and looking for someone, anyone who might offer support. During one particularly revealing message, he mentioned that he had nowhere else to turn and was facing possible eviction from his apartment. The naked need in these communications contrasted sharply with the total absence of interest he had shown in my life for 15 years, including times when my grandmother and I had faced similar financial uncertainties without any support from him. As his situation apparently worsened, his messages began including specific requests, asking if he could stay with us temporarily until he got back on his feet. He mentioned looking forward to getting to know my grandmother again, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she had raised his abandoned child while managing her own health challenges without any assistance from him. 3 weeks after his initial contact, he appeared unannounced at my house, having apparently obtained the address through means he didn't explain. Standing on my porch was a diminished version of the father I remembered. His once confident posture now hunched, his hair completely gray, his expression a carefully constructed mask of contrition. "I know I should have called," first he began when I opened the door, "but I was afraid you would tell me not to come." The moment of decision I had been contemplating theoretically was suddenly immediate and unavoidable. My response would set the tone for whatever relationship might or might not exist between us going forward. Years of therapy had taught me that this moment was not about him or his needs, but about my boundaries and well-being. My father stood on my porch, his face a mixture of hope and desperation as rain began to fall around him. The symmetry with that night 15 years earlier when he had left me at my grandmother's door during a rainstorm was not lost on either of us. Now our positions were reversed. He was the one seeking shelter and acceptance, while I held the power to welcome or reject him. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice smaller than I remembered. "Just to talk." After a moment's consideration, I stepped aside, allowing him into my home, but not offering to take his coat or provide refreshments. This minimal courtesy was more than he had shown me, but reflected the person I had chosen to become rather than the treatment I had received. We sat in my living room, the silence stretching between us until he finally spoke. "You have done well for yourself," he observed, looking around at the modest but comfortable home I had created. "I always knew you would." "Did you?" I responded evenly. "Based on what evidence?" He flinched at my directness but continued his prepared speech about regrets and second chances. He described his current circumstances in detail: the pending eviction, the frozen bank accounts, the former friends who no longer returned his calls. As he spoke, it became increasingly clear that his primary motivation for reconnecting was practical rather than emotional, a need for housing and financial support disguised as a desire for reconciliation. "I have nowhere else to go," he admitted, finally dropping the pretense of his earlier messages. "Everyone else has abandoned me." The irony of his statement hung in the air between us. I thought of my grandmother in her bedroom down the hall, the woman who had never abandoned anyone despite limited resources and her own significant challenges. I thought of myself at 13, struggling to understand why my father had chosen his wife's comfort over his child's well-being. "What happened with Patricia?" I asked, curious about the missing years and the stepmother who had orchestrated my removal. His expression darkened. "She left when your brother was 2. Said I was too focused on work and not giving her the lifestyle she deserved. Took half of everything in the divorce." This information aligned with what I had suspected about Patricia's character, but revealed nothing about my father's reflection on his role in our family's dissolution. He had apparently never questioned his decision to choose her over me, even after she had demonstrated the conditional nature of her commitment to him as well. "And your third wife," I continued, referencing the woman mentioned in the news articles. "Vanessa was different," he insisted. "We were happy until all this legal trouble started. Then she just left. Wouldn't even consider standing by me through the difficult time." Again, his narrative positioned him as the victim of others' choices, rather than experiencing the consequences of his own actions. The pattern was so clear from the outside, yet he seemed completely blind to it even now. "Why did you never contact me?" I asked the question that had burned inside me for years. "Not for my birthdays. My graduation, not once in 15 years. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "I thought about you often," he claimed. "But Patricia felt it would be confusing for your brother to have you coming and going. Then after she left, I was so busy with the practice and years had passed. It just seemed too late." His explanation was both revealing and entirely insufficient. He had prioritized Patricia's feelings, then his own discomfort, then his business, placing my well-being last in every calculation. Even now, he could not offer the simple acknowledgement that he had abandoned his parental responsibility and chosen comfort over commitment. "I understand if you are angry," he continued when I didn't immediately respond. "But I was hoping we could move forward. Family should stick together during difficult times." The statement, so similar to my grandmother's philosophy, yet so different in its application, crystallized my decision. I stood, indicating that our conversation was concluding. "You are right that families should support each other," I said, my voice calm and deliberate. "My grandmother taught me that every day for the past 15 years. She showed me what unconditional love looks like when she took me in without hesitation, despite her limited resources and health challenges." My father nodded, perhaps believing I was moving toward forgiveness and acceptance of his situation. I continued, disabusing him of this misconception. "She also taught me about boundaries and self-respect, about not allowing people to value me only when it's convenient for them. I've built a life without your input or support, and I don't owe you access to that life simply because you've run out of other options." His expression fell as he realized where the conversation was heading. "But I'm still your father," he protested. "Despite everything, that hasn't changed. Being a father is about choices and actions, not biology," I replied. "You made your choice very clear when you dropped me off in the rain 15 years ago. I'm making my choice equally clear today." I walked to the door and opened it, the gesture unmistakable. "I don't wish you ill," I said as he reluctantly rose to leave. "I hope you find a way through your current difficulties. But it won't be by moving into my home or accessing the stability I've created without your help." He paused at the threshold, making one final attempt. "What about forgiveness? Doesn't everyone deserve a second chance?" The question was manipulative in its appeal to universal values, attempting to position my boundary as a moral failing rather than a healthy response to his behavior. My grandmother had prepared me for this moment as well. "Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation," I explained. "I've forgiven you for my own peace, not to facilitate your comfort. A second chance would require genuine accountability and changed behavior, demonstrated over time, not desperation during a crisis." As he walked back to his car, shoulders hunched against the rain, I felt an unexpected sense of completion rather than conflict. The conversation had provided something I hadn't realized. I needed the opportunity to articulate my boundaries from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. Inside, I found my grandmother waiting in the kitchen, her expression concerned but supportive. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am," I replied, surprising myself with the truth of the statement. "For the first time in relation to him, I think I really am." She nodded, understanding what had transpired without needing details. "Some doors are better left closed," she said softly, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. In the days that followed, my father made several more attempts at contact, leaving increasingly desperate messages and even sending a mutual acquaintance to plead his case. Each time I maintained the boundary I had established during our meeting, neither engaging with his manipulation nor responding with anger. Eventually, the calls stopped. I learned through local news that he had moved to another state, presumably to stay with distant relatives or friends who were either more forgiving or less informed about his patterns of behavior. The knowledge brought neither satisfaction nor regret, simply a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter had finally reached its natural conclusion. The experience of facing my father from a position of security and strength allowed me to release lingering questions about my worth that his abandonment had created. The 13-year-old girl who had wondered what she had done wrong to deserve rejection could finally rest, replaced by the adult who understood that his choices reflected his character, not her value. Today, 5 years after that final conversation on my porch, my life continues to evolve in positive directions. My grandmother, now in her 80s, still lives with me, though her health requires additional support that I can fortunately provide. My consulting business has expanded, allowing me to hire several employees and create the kind of supportive work environment I wish had existed for my younger self. I occasionally hear updates about my father through distant connections, learning that he has found marginal employment in his new location and apparently reconnected with his youngest children on limited terms controlled by their mother. These snippets of information no longer trigger emotional turmoil, simply passing observations about a life that runs parallel to but separate from my own. The lesson of my father's reappearance and my response to it has shaped how I approach all relationships, both personal and professional. I've learned that boundaries are not punishments, but frameworks that allow healthy connections to flourish. That forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not an obligation you owe to others. And most importantly, that family is defined by consistent love and support, not by blood or obligation. My grandmother, who modeled these principles throughout my life, continues to be my greatest teacher and the true parent my father chose not to be. The family we have created, though small, is built on mutual respect and unwavering commitment values that cannot be abandoned when circumstances become challenging or inconvenient. In choosing to maintain boundaries with my father, I honored not only my own worth, but the lessons of the woman who never once treated me as a burden or an afterthought. Some might view my decision as harsh or unforgiving, but those closest to me understand it as an act of self-respect and the natural consequence of choices made long ago. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision about whether to allow someone back into your life after they abandoned or hurt you? How did you determine if they deserved a second chance, and what boundaries did you establish? Share your cold experience in the comments below to help others facing similar challenging family situations. If this story of establishing healthy boundaries resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating complex family dynamics. Share this video with someone who might need encouragement to prioritize their well-being in difficult family relationships. Thank you for listening to my journey from abandonment to empowerment, and remember that sometimes the most loving choice you can make is to love yourself enough to walk away.